Katie.
All right, thank you everybody for being here. Our session today is titled Reimagining Appraisal in Changing Contexts, Considerations and Case Studies on Deaccessioning. We have 5 presenters today. First up will be myself. I am the manuscripts archivist at the University of Texas at San Antonio Library Special Collections. Our second presenter will be Christine Etterman. She's the Assistant City Archivist at the Dallas Municipal Archives. Followed by Ruth Bryan, who is the University Archivist at the Special Collections Research Center at the University of Kentucky Libraries. And then Zach Stein, who is Head of Special Collections and Assistant Professor at the Edith Garland Dupré Library at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And finally, we'll wrap it up with Dylan McDonald, who is the Political Papers Archivist and Special Collections Librarian at New Mexico State University Library Archives and Special Collections. All right, bear with me one moment while I switch presentations to my presentation. All right, does that look okay?
Looks great.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to dive right in and talk about developing a deaccessioning policy and procedures at the University of Texas at San Antonio, or you may hear me refer to it as UTSA. So this is just going to be kind of a general overview of our process and how we got to the point of building a deaccessioning policy. So in 2017, 2018, thereabouts, I redid our collection development policy and had about a paragraph in there on deaccessioning, but I wasn't able really to devote as much time as I wanted to in that particular document. In July of 2018, I definitely had deaccessioning on the brain. I was doing a lot of brainstorming, made a lot of notes and thoughts about deaccessioning and how it should work at our institution. And by October 2018, I had drafted a new deaccession form. Our form had not been updated since 2011, so it was time to give it a look. Fast forward one whole year to October 2019, I was able to get a meeting with our Assistant Dean for Collections and a couple other librarians that are responsible for collections at UTSA, and talk about, considerations that we needed to think about when deaccessioning things from not just special collections, but because it's a library asset, a university asset, thinking about what steps we need to take to, move forward with something like that. And then, of course, in March 2020, we all know COVID happened, and that set things back quite a bit, but I never forgot about it or really lost sight of it. So starting in January, my colleague and I began policy planning and creation in earnest. So I'm working with our special collections librarian. She handles our rare books. So it's a joint archives and book withdrawal policy that we're creating. And we both work in special collections, so it is specific to our unit. We've reviewed a lot of other policies and thought about things that worked and didn't work for us. We ordered withdrawal stamps, which we didn't have before. Just, lots of little things like that that we needed to do that hadn't been done. We're still finalizing our policy. It's not complete at the moment. But I will tell you that our sections that we have are our vision and mission. Because it is a policy, I like to start policies always with the vision and mission of our department or university. Our statement of purpose for the document, listing out various criteria for deaccessions, additional considerations that we need to think of when we want to deaccession something, disposition methods and how to achieve each one of those methods, and then appendices with forms and stuff like that. So you're going to see these sections as I go through my presentation, except for the vision, mission, and statement of purpose. That will be, you know, if you make your own policy, you have your own policy that's unique to you. So criteria for deaccessions. What gets the boot? How do we decide? It's not enough to just say that it doesn't fit with your collecting policy and stop there, though that is a viable, legitimate reason. You know, it could be severely restricted to the point where nobody can use it. It could be dangerous, you know, if it's off-gassing, or maybe you have like a box of nitrate negatives or something like that hanging out. There could be ownership issues. You may not be the owner of the materials. That does happen. It could be duplicative of other resources. It could be something that's already publicly available. It could be a forgery, like a falsified document. It could be damaged beyond repair. I've definitely deaccessioned a couple things that were damaged, not just beyond repair, but like you couldn't even tell what was like written in the document. It just wasn't worth keeping. You may have things that you don't know what they are and you don't know where they came from. The usage may be really, really low. Like maybe nobody's ever used the collection in 30 years, despite, you know, it having a finding aid and all of that. It might be a better fit elsewhere. Or it could be an inaccessible format. You know, if you have something that has format dependency, and you can't get a hold of a playback device, you know, maybe it would be better to have it somewhere else where they can, you know, play it back. Lots of different reasons. And all of these are listed in our policy. And I find that it's helpful to have a list of things like this to think about all your options, and think about what is a legitimate option and what is not. I also have other considerations listed in our policy, such as the reputation of your institution, restrictions that may have been placed by, say, the donor, that, you know, guide how you can handle the materials, access to information. If you get rid of this thing, you know, is the information available elsewhere? Is it important information that needs to be kept somewhere? Just maybe not your institution. How are people going to get a hold of that information? And just in general, the effect of your actions, the effect of deaccessioning or destroying or transferring something. What will that have on, what impact will that have, like on your users, on your collections as a whole, on the reputation of your institution, et cetera, et cetera. So one more thing that is super, super important to consider is deed status. And this is just really, it's a tough subject. If you don't have a deed for a collection, I know we have collections without deeds, and I know other people do too. So what we decided to do at UTSA is that we would make a good faith effort to search for a donor, their heirs, or their, you know, representative. And I looked up a definition of good faith effort because I really wanted to like kind of flesh out this part. This is from the People's Law Dictionary. So the dictionary definition was, quote, an honest intent to act without taking an unfair advantage over another person, or to fulfill a promise to act even with some legal technicality is not fulfilled. So in this case, I'm personally seeing the legal technicality as not having a deed, or other agreement, whatever your agreement with a donor would be, or perhaps your agreement is insufficient. You may have a deed, and we just had this situation at UTSA, I'll talk about it in a minute, where we had a deed, but it didn't stipulate the donor's wishes. It didn't say, you know, you can get rid of stuff, or this is what I want you to do if you ever get rid of things. So there's a lot of different scenarios that could come into play here. If at all possible, you know, especially if your donor is living, get that deed, make sure that your deed stipulates what you're allowed to do with the materials. And in our deed at UTSA, we have a time clause of 90 days. So if we want to deaccession something and we contact them, the donor, and they don't get back to us within 90 days, we're able to get rid of it. If a donor is deceased, you want to look for their heirs and a will or another document that indicates the donor's wishes. And if they're incapacitated, there may be a power of attorney. I will underscore that, you know, you may want to check your state's abandoned property laws and or consult your legal team at your institution in whatever capacity you may have legal representation. Okay, so our disposition options that we outlined, this is like in our policy, the order of operations kind of that we've decided to go through. Our primary top options when we want to get rid of something are going to be either to transfer it to another institutional collection or to return it to the donor or heirs. So a bit about the first part, UTSA has a museum attached to it. We also have an art collection. And, you know, you could transfer something there if it's a better fit and keep it within, you know, the university if it's still a valuable resource, but it's just not right for the archives. So that's why I put that there. Our secondary option is to offer materials to other institutions within the UT system. There are multiple institutions like UT Arlington, UT El Paso, et cetera, et cetera. So we are required to do that before making any other move. And once we do that, if nobody in the UT system wants it, there is a third option of either transferring it to another repository or destroying it. There are theoretically fourth level options to sell, donate, or trash the materials, but those are pretty complicated and could come back to kind of bite you a little bit. We've had instances where, say, like people tried to sell books. The library used to have a book sale and people would turn around and try to donate the book right back to us. So think about that before you take those kinds of actions. In our particular instance, you know, if we want to donate something, we have to have the donor stipulate it in their deed. So it gets a little bit more messy than some of these other top three kind of options. Okay, a bit about navigating donor relationships. So I would say in my experiences, 3 examples are listed here. In my experiences, that communication and transparency are absolutely key. And I found that it pays to be just like really sensitive to the donors or the heirs. They may care very, very much about the collection. But I think it's important to be honest and balance that with some tact about why your repository wants to deaccession the materials. You know, and do the legwork for them and help them find another repository or something like that, you know, an alternative solution. Because oftentimes I found that donors just have no idea where to put these things, especially if the archive that already took them doesn't want them anymore. So I find that, you know, us archivists know a little bit better than the donors. So the examples I'm giving first are the Frank Rosengren papers. The creator's deceased, but the wife and daughter are still living, and they were the donors. So I was able to like talk to them, and they were really nice about it, and we transferred some of the materials to another repository. You know, I was able to get their approval and everything. We have another collection from the San Antonio Women's Hall of Fame. And this is an instance where we had an old deed and we did not have any indication of what their preference is for us to deaccession materials. And in this case, we were able to get in touch with the board and get a new deed signed. And then finally, we have a film credit collection. I won't mention it because this is not a final deal right now. This is still in progress. But the donor is deceased. He does not have any heirs. And right now we're working with the executor of his estate to fulfill his wishes, which are stipulated in his will. Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit talk a bit about documentation. So documentation is huge to me, and as somebody who has found deaccessioned materials, or not the materials themselves, but just like the, you know, remnants of what was deaccessioned, I would want to know more. I found that a lot of the documentation for things that had been deaccessioned before my time was insufficient. I didn't really understand what was deaccessioned or always why. And so I think it's important to, at minimum, have a deaccession, transfer, or destruction form that kind of like lists out all of these different important components to document why you got rid of something. If you're destroying something, a certificate of destruction is really important. You should include that with the file. Communication with donors, particularly if you did not find the donor and you get rid of it or destroy it. Like in a case where we did not have a deed for a collection, actually this is several cases where we did not have deeds, we sent out certified mail return receipt requests to, you know, donors trying to get deeds. And when we didn't get it, we still got that return receipt and saved that in our file to document our attempt to contact the donor. You may wish to include a couple photos of the items or a note to file if things were just kind of funky with the deaccession, which is almost always the case. And of course, an authorization. Somebody needs to kind of give their seal of approval and say, hey, this is okay, this is kosher. So I know it's a little small. I hope you guys can see it okay. But this is our deaccession form that I created for UTSA. It has a lot of different information. I won't go over it in detail because I'm already over time, but if you want a copy of it, please feel free to email me and I will happily send one to you. Okay, and then last slide. Don't forget to follow through. This is part of our procedures at UTSA to delete a catalog record for your collection if it exists, remove the finding aid from whatever publication platform you have it on, save a copy for reference, that can be helpful. Update your control files or whatever you call your files where you keep all your collection information. And update archive space or whatever database that you're using to manage your collections. I can't tell you how many times I've gone and found a collection only to realize after much digging that it was something that was deaccessioned and it just wasn't documented properly. So we're really excited to get this policy finalized and have things running smoothly, hopefully. All right, thank you for your time, guys. That's my email address. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out.
I just wanted to jump in here real quick before the next presenter. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. And I do believe that presentations will be available in the recordings.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Christy, and unfortunately, I have to use these, so bear with me. I am the Assistant City Archivist for the City of Dallas, as mentioned a little while ago. And being at a municipal or government archive gives us a little bit of a different flavor for how we can approach accessioning, appraisal, and deaccessioning. And certain ways of deaccessioning, we can kind of do our best to forestall it, actually. At least that's the plan. So today I'm going to talk about appraisal and deaccessioning, of course, in that municipal space, accepting some materials from our normal donors, which are city entities, and then some public donors, and then municipal considerations for working with those city departments and elected officials. All right, so despite early archivists of 100 years ago or whatever, who never dreamed as much paper would be existing in archives, they're probably going to roll over a little bit, but we all know that deaccessioning is just a part of life anymore. All right, so for the municipal collections that we have, we sort of have built-in accessioning parameters that some repositories don't have, such as a narrow mission, which limits our materials and donors. We deal mostly with, City of Dallas government, so that really is a very specific set of material to have. So we can pass on certain things that outside donors call us on and recommend other repositories in the city, which is, helping people who, like Katie said, just don't know where to turn. So we have the opportunity to dictate what we take from those city entities and elected officials. And that gives us the possibility to avoiding deaccessioning significant amounts. We still end up doing a little, but because we can work with these internal groups, we can try to set ourselves up for a win-win situation. Doesn't always work, but we try. All right. Okay, come on, forward. There we go. So for fixed accessioning, actually, there we go. So I'm going to talk about two types of accessioning. These are hardly SAA glossary terms, but this is kind of what we're going to use today. Fixed and managed. So fixed is what most of us are used to. It's that take it or leave it. You get a big box, you have no idea what's in it. If there's any organization at all, we're thrilled. And then there's the managed, which is really more of what we have here. And it typically enables us to head off some deaccessioning at the pass. We can make the chore a little bit less with some of the ways that we can work with groups, as I keep saying. So let's go forward with talk about some fixed. So with the fixed accessioning, deaccessioning is going to be required. It's just, nobody has that perfect world. And that's what everybody sees the most, of course. You don't typically get the chance to appraise it on site. It's take it or leave it, take it all or leave it all. Or even if they're saying you can pick what you want, as archivists, we don't always want to cherry pick, as my boss would say. It's too time consuming, everything goes. And normal accessioning kind of has to apply afterwards. If you're sitting in an archives or in somebody's attic and it's 90 degrees, you're not going to take time to appraise on site. You're going to get it out of there. The donor may not be the creator, or even if they are, they may still be saying, just take it or leave it. So then you get it back to your office and you've got to figure out, what's appropriate to your mission statement? Does it have that future research or historical viability for it, or space, or is it damaged? Is it going to poison you, as Katie pointed out? And all of those normal deaccessioning rules. So recently we had an unusual donor in that we did accept something from the public. And it is a large collection and for cemetery files for really Dallas County and other large parts of North Texas. We knew the files, the donor specified she wanted us to have the files at her death. And so her granddaughters, reached out to us and we worked with them to get it all. We knew the files didn't have that much original scholarship, but they were easily the most concise collection of family, lost, and abandoned cemeteries in North Texas. And we were really chuffed that she wanted us to have this body of work. There are several aspects of it, though. We have the good. She was very meticulous file keeper. So everything was alphabetized by cemetery or biography and subject files. And it was all in little boxes and little folders. And it was all very nicely kept for us. That made moving it out very nice. And doing our initial appraisal of it very nice. The bad, as I said, we couldn't appraise it all at her home. And it was in garages, it was in storerooms, and it was August. So we just put it in the car and got it home. And then the ugly is that we knew that the files would have a lot of extraneous information that would be of little use to us or to researchers, or it just had no business being in there at all. What was in the entire collection? There were books, which were actually really, some of them were nice to add to our archives reference collection. But books, maps, his burial lists, cemetery histories, cemetery locations, lost cemeteries, things like that. But then also they included personal correspondence, invoices for her air conditioning getting worked on, scrap pieces of paper offering no context. Thankfully, we didn't have any legal issues or others with the family or the donors, and there weren't any problems with the materials themselves being too fragile or anything like that. So we didn't have those issues, but did we have deaccession issues? You bet we did. But we also tried to look at places for a win-win, like could we transfer it to other collections if something were available in our own archives, or could we transfer it to another repository? So we deaccessioned hundreds of scraps of paper with notes that were meaningful to her, but not to us. Here's an example of 3 of hundreds of them. And these are actually, a lot of times they were within a folder that would mean something, but still it really out of context. And if you really didn't know what you were looking at, I think I found grocery lists in there and, birthday gift lists. So a lot of it didn't have anything to do and just got thrown in there. And this woman was an inveterate saver of paper. So everything is on little scraps, or it's written on 2 or 3 times in every use of the parts of paper, which means that some of her copies are pretty interesting. We also had hundreds of find a grave and ancestry pages and newspaper clippings that either bore no association to the cemetery for the file that they were in, or they're so publicly accessible that there was no reason for us to keep them. They're likely part of her, obviously, larger research, but we didn't need them. So those got scrapped as well. Dozens of pages of personal correspondence that some of it was related to seminaries and that we kept, but a lot of it was of her own local activism and just letters to friends and family as well. And her family made it clear they wanted nothing back. It was all ours. So they knew that deaccessioning was going to occur, though, and they were just fine with that. So this is a portion of the acceptance letter that we sent to the donor. Now, one way that in the Dallas archives that we kind of handle getting those accession letters and all of these gifts of deed is, since most of it is internal transfer, we will send the email to the Department of Water or Parks or whatever and say, here's what we've just received from you. Here's what we're going to do with it. And you agree with that. And then they will reply back to their email. And then so that way the onus is not on them to send an email, which is not nearly as important to them as it is to us. But we still have that paper trail and it's all good between within the departments. We kind of follow the same way when we do have the rare external donor. So this shows, we've gotten your donation. It is our property. You can look at it anytime you want, but we also reserve the right to get rid of it or find a new home for it. So we've kind of covered all our bases with that. And that's what we did. So I was able to transfer some files to better collections within our own stacks, which was nice. And then there were a couple of piles that I was able to deaccession to other local repositories. We had printed materials and things that would have been of value to those groups. So I was able to transfer those. So in that case, it's a win-win. It's out of our hands, but it's into the hands of people who truly would like it. So this deaccessioning was not simple. It's taken John and me months, but we've gotten through it. And so kind of that's the fixed, what we're calling fixed accessioning, which is what most of us are used to. So now going on to what we do with kind of the managed, the result is that the deaccessioning is far less. We can really focus on our mission, and which is pretty narrow of the permanently valuable and historical records of the government of the city of Dallas. That's pretty narrow. And so that enables us to really keep true to that. Anybody who wants to can have a tour of our space. Sometimes talking about the archives doesn't mean anything. But once you've seen the archives, then talking about archives means something more. So we see the bell come on in lots of people's brains when they come through for a tour, especially in our local officials that are, new city council members, things like that, department heads. It really makes a lot more sense once they see the gray boxes. We also work with our record management team on the message that they give to their records liaisons in the different departments, on the message about keeping things for the archives. Here's what we want, here's what we do. So there's a good relationship there. And then we provide help to city officials on documenting their public service. We have multiple handouts that we give them. And so the handouts really help us to help them help us avoid deaccessioning as much, because they'll know exactly what to give us. They know that we don't want 100 teddy bears that somebody gave them. And the most biggest question that John and I hear all the time is, oh, well, that didn't seem important. Why? We don't need to keep that. And so we try to beat it into them that let us decide what's important. One of the things that's really cool that we have is the annotated speech that Mayor Rawlings gave after the ambush in Dallas 5 years ago. Yeah, it's just a speech, but it's got his personal notes on it and some things that he changed right before he went on stage. To somebody in the office, oh, that's boring. To us, that makes that speech special versus just just somebody's type speech that they sent over. All right. In some of those handouts, we're very specific. What we do accept, what we don't accept. We don't want all 500 of the plaques that you were given. We don't care, and we don't have rooms for them. I'm sure everybody can relate to that one. We do want formal photos. We do want neighborhood, district information. If you had a party for your district, that's not necessarily going to come back to us. So we would love to have pictures of that. So we try to really work with departments and elected officials so they know what to keep for us. All right, so some of the takeaways are: stick to your repository's mission. It's not always easy, and sometimes there's reasons not to, but if you find that you're not, then maybe you can work with people to either broaden it or narrow it, depending on what you're finding are the issues with it. I know that's not easy. Maybe you do need to rewrite it. Educate your donors on documenting and collecting, kind of like we try to do. Here's what we want. Here's the best way to get it to us. We're not going to, we'll be happy to work with you if you're unsure about anything. We'd rather deaccession something than not have somebody give us something, but we do the best we can to educate people on why the archives do what they do. Set expectations kind of goes along with the education of here's what we want, here's what we don't want. And then find win-win situations, whether it's another collection of ours or to another repository, or in some situations, you may be able to take some of those deaccession materials and sell them. Certainly that is not available to most places, but some places it is. So if you can sell it, you've made a little money for yourself or maybe your friends group. And again, it's outside of your walls now. You don't have to have the space for that. All right, that's what I've got to say today. Thanks for watching. And now Ruth is going to talk to you.
All right, great. So this is another case study following along from Christie's case studies, basically, where I'll be talking about a situation that we had where the son of a living donor requested the return of the family scrapbooks that were included in his father's collection. And I'll tell the story of the deaccession and then unpack the appraisal decision frameworks I believe were operating in the story. All right, so this presentation builds on work I've done with Marcella Huggard at the University of Kansas on a webinar on appraisal basics for the Society of American Archivists Arrangement and Description Certificate, and also work with Laura Uglian-Jackson at the University of Northern Colorado, who is the editor of the 2019 book on reappraisal and deaccessioning in archives and special collections. And this deaccessioning case study appears in the book, but discussed from a different point of view. I should also say that all the photos in the presentation are from our collection of the University of Kentucky Public Relations Photographs, and I've used icons throughout from the nunproject.com. So I am Ruth Bryan. I'm the University Archivist at the University of Kentucky Special Collections Research Center, which is a division of the University of Kentucky Libraries. And the libraries have 2 other divisions and 4 branch libraries. And the Fine Arts Library, which was a player in this deaccessioning case study, is one of those branch libraries. The University of Kentucky is the land grant institution for Kentucky. It was established in 1865. It has 17 colleges and a graduate school and just over 31,000 students. So for context, Special Collections collects everything basically related to Kentucky in any format. We are a hybrid repository, so we are both the repository of record for the University of Kentucky, and then also lots of personal papers as well as many other formats. And we do the records management for the university as well. So here's the story. And I have changed some identifying details, and I won't be using any names even for myself, even though I am also a player in the story. So in 2005, after 2 years of negotiation, the libraries acquired through a deed of gift a voluminous collection of artwork, personal and professional correspondence, press releases, clippings, and photographs that document the creative output of a prolific and successful artist who is also a professor in the College of Fine Arts at the university. The head of the Fine Arts Library championed the acquisition of this collection because it is a rich source for studying the creative process, as well as for studying the life and works of the artist and his circle of colleagues. The Fine Arts Library head also had a long-standing personal and professional relationship with the donor. The donor imposed a substantial restriction on the collection that closed to research all parts of the collection except the art, except by permission of the donor. The collection was physically housed in special collections where it was considered part of the university archives, even though it has no records documenting the university. From 2005 to 2007, using special funding the head of the Fine Arts Library obtained from the library dean, the collection was initially processed by a graduate fine arts student under the direction of the UK records manager, who was acting as university archivist. During this time, the head of the Fine Arts Library worked with the donor, the Fine Arts Library, and the College of Fine Arts to produce joint public programs that related to or featured the donor and his art. As the donor is prolific, he continued to bring additions to the head of the Fine Arts Library, who spent hours with him reviewing his recent work and listening to his stories as part of the process of accepting donations. Between 2010 and 2013, quite a lot of staffing changes took place. The person who had been head of special collections when the collection was acquired retired, and a new associate dean was promoted into the position starting in 2010. In 2011, a new university archivist was hired, and in 2012, the head of the Fine Arts Library began a phased retirement assignment as the Arts and Outreach Librarian in Special Collections. The new university archivist thought that with the change of staff, there was an opportunity to revisit the original restriction, as well as significantly improve the arrangement and description for the collection, which was not up to professional standards. The university archivist asked the librarian to work with the donor to loosen the original restrictions on the collection, which resulted in an addendum to the deed of gift that opened up for research all portions of the collection except the correspondence. This allowed the university archivist to reorganize the original 19 series into 9, tightening the description and providing enhanced researcher understanding of the contents. The librarian also continued to work with the donor to accept additions to the collection, again, involving meetings that often lasted several hours. In October 2015, the Arts and Outreach Librarian received a request from a son of the donor to remove from the collection 3 boxes of scrapbooks containing personal family photographs, family memorabilia, and professional and local ephemera that the donor saved daily and filed in chronologically arranged albums to detail the minutiae of his life activities. The donor did, and still does, this because he considers all aspects of his life to be intimately connected with and impossible to disentangle from his creative output. The son claimed that the scrapbooks belonged to the family, not to the donor, and that they had no academic research value. They dated from the time period when the donor was still married to his now ex-wife and the children were young. Because of the high level of care and interest the donor and his family had grown to expect and rely on from the libraries overall, as embodied in the Arts and Outreach Librarian's attention, the son had every expectation that his request would at minimum receive attention and at maximum be granted. Special Collections leadership responded to the request, as they do for any return request from family members. The policy is that there are no returns of donated material after appraisal is finished. There is a clause in the deed of gift which authorizes Special Collections to dispose of material that is determined to have no permanent value, but in this case, the scrapbooks were appraised as being historically significant. Because in all of the previous return request situations, everyone had accepted this policy, the university archivist and the librarian believed they had addressed the question and resolved the matter. However, about a year later, the librarian received another email from the son, again requesting the return of the family scrapbooks. At that time, he presented slightly different reasons from the first request. He argued that the scrapbooks were not relevant to the study of his father's artistic endeavor. They contain personal and intimate family details and should not be available to others for research. Moreover, he stated that because of how his parents' separation agreement was worded, his father had not owned the family material in the first place and didn't have the rights to donate it. From the university archivist's perspective, however, in addition to the details and chronology of the donor's artistic output, the collection could be used to research the cultural context of a white, American, middle-class family from the mid to late 20th century. Based in this appraisal decision that the scrapbooks had research value, the librarian and archivist offered to close the scrapbooks for a defined period of time and to make high-quality scans of the items the son felt should be shared among the rest of the family. The son rejected all of these perspectives and suggestions. He didn't believe the personal family items were historically relevant. Neither a restriction on the material nor making copies could satisfy his feeling that the scrapbooks had been wrongly donated and should be returned. Special Collections leadership reconsidered the return request for two reasons. The main one was that the son had presented an argument about the chain of custody of the scrapbooks, that is, that they had been improperly donated. The second reason was that in this case, the donor was alive, and thus the deed of gift could be revised or renegotiated. A third and subsidiary reason was the university archivist's feeling that the son had a high level of expectation of being heard and responded to because of the warm and ongoing collaboration his father had with the arts and outreach librarian. Let's see. After months of deliberation, including consulting with the University Legal Counsel's office on how to respond humanely to an emotionally difficult situation for the family while remaining true to the professional standards, ethics, and the gift agreement, Special Collections decided that they would work with the donor to make an addendum to the deed of gift. The key thing would be for the donor to make the deaccession request, which might be something he would choose not to do, as he considers everything in his life to be relevant documentation of his creative output. However, by late June 2017, the university archivist had received the donor's email request to return the scrapbooks. The deed of gift addendum had been prepared and signed, and the material had been returned to the donor. The university archivist also removed the scrapbook's description from the finding aid. Returning the scrapbooks did go against Special Collections staff original appraisal decision. However, in comparison to other materials that make up the bulk of the collection, the scrapbooks were a relatively small portion overall. In this case, the relationship between Special Collections and the library that had been nurtured for at least 14 years outweighed the small gap in documentation left by the absence of the deaccessioned items. So to reflect on the appraisal decisions in this case study, to start from 2003 to 2007, these faculty papers were acquired to document this particular artist's creative process or research. They were not acquired for the reasons faculty papers usually come into the archives, which is as evidence of university functions, or to fill gaps in the university's official records. This appraisal decision was possible because Special Collections is both the repository for university records, as well as a collecting repository for Kentucky-focused primary sources. Also in the first years of the case study, the library staff involved had a donor relations style that was very personal. Staff tended to say yes to all donor requests, which in this case included the decision to accept the collection with the restrictions. In addition, although the collection was housed and managed by Special Collections, it was the head of the Fine Arts Library who pushed for the acquisition. The associate dean and other archivists in Special Collections at this time tended to be more focused on collections and donors within their personal subject interests. There was also not much collaboration between Special Collections and the branch libraries. So although the head of the Fine Arts Library obtained initial funds for hiring a student assistant to process the collection, Special Collections did not provide appropriate staff to supervise it. The records manager was not trained as an archivist, was accustomed to making appraisal decisions on university records using the record schedule, which in this case had no applicability as there are no university records in the collection, and had an item level approach to archival processing. Even the significant portion of the collection that was restricted was described in great detail. In general, the records manager was operating within a keeper appraisal philosophy. That is, because there were personal papers and not university records in the collection, everything was equally valuable. In the next years of the case study, the Special Collections documentary mission, collecting policy, and overall appraisal value of the content of the collection didn't change, but relationships and resources changed significantly. Retirements, new staff, and advancement of existing staff into new positions brought into Special Collections professional archivists who were less likely to always say yes to donors and to all materials in a collection. Also, there were professionals. These were professionals who were interested in all subjects and formats of historical value. Also, this change in leadership allowed the Fine Arts Library and Special Collections to collaborate on collections of interest to both. An archivist was now involved with donor relations and collection management, which had not been the case earlier. This enabled the renegotiation of the restrictions on the collection. Appraisal decisions were now part of the collection's life cycle and were ongoing. In fact, during this time period, some portions of the existing collection were now appraised as out of scope. Overall, special collections staff and leadership made active appraisal decisions rather than keeping everything or preserving and processing all items at the same level of granularity and resources. In the last years of the case study, the documentary mission, collecting policy, and resources required were unchanged. However, the Sun's request to return the scrapbooks and the upcoming full retirement of the arts and outreach librarian once again changed the relationships and politics around the collection. The university archivist began to be the primary contact for the donor. No longer would there be a personal relationship that included hours-long meetings. The university archivist worked with the donor to bring in additions to the collection on an annual rather than ad hoc basis. Special collections leadership were able to use policy to work with this living donor on deaccessioning material that he wished to have removed, which was prompted by the Sun's request. They were also able to return the material that was appraised as out of scope in the second round of processing. However, although the overall historical value of the content of the collection in documenting the creative work and process of the donor was unchanged, special collections leadership decided that the scrapbook's value specifically was less than the rest of the materials in the collection, and that the value of the relationship, or at least the way the relationship had been carried out over time, outweighed the value of the scrapbooks. So in summary, some final thoughts. The overall reason for acquiring the collection in the first place didn't change. The documentary mission and collecting policy of special collections as a hybrid repository allows for the papers of faculty to be acquired for multiple reasons. Other aspects of appraisal driven by staffing changes, which are inevitable in any repository, did change, especially around relationships and politics. This had an impact on the overall institutional context of appraisal. Special collections moved from keeper appraisal frameworks to active and iterative appraisal decisions, moved from personal and special donor relations to professional and policy-based donor relations, and moved from siloed to collaborative relationships within the library, where subject and format experts can work together on a collection that has value for both. One of the biggest things I've learned from being a part of and reflecting on this case study is that the way individual librarians and archivists interact with individual donors has a long-term impact on appraisal in the repository over the lifetime of a collection. We are always dealing with the appraisal decisions of the staff that built the archives before us, and those that came after us will be alternatively praising and cursing our decisions. Thank you so much for listening to the presentation. And now on to Zach, I think.
Zach, unmute yourself.
All right, everybody can see my slides, right? All right. All right. Well, thanks everybody. So yeah, my name is Zach Stein. I'm the head of special collections at Edith Garland Dupre Library at University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Today, in light of our discussion of deaccessioning, I want to bring up a particular experience, a case study regarding us deaccessioning a large collection. However, this is a particularly unique collection because we had absolutely no documentation to work with, and hence the title Deaccessioning in the Dark. Okay, so just to start with a little bit of background, first with regards to our special collections department. So the special collections at UL Lafayette, we are part of the Edith Garland Dupre Library, and our special collections is divided into many different sections. We have, so the sections that that are under me are the University Archives, the Acadian and Manuscripts Collection, Louisiana Room, and the Rare Books Collection, and the Digital Archives as well. I'm not going to talk so much about the University Archives and the Digital Archives and Rare Books Collection, Louisiana, because the collection that I'm going to be going into is from our Acadian Manuscripts Collection, and that is those are a collection of personal papers that specifically reflect the Acadiana region and the community around the university. And so these personal papers cover a wide variety of topics. They can include politics, public history, the setup of an organization, and also our economic development, especially with regards to the oil and gas industry, which is large in Louisiana. So this particular collection that I will be referring to was known as the Clay Research Papers. So this was a very large collection, unprocessed, and it mainly focused on the oil and gas industry. So this collection specifically featured logs, field maps, lots of books on related to the oil and gas industry, and also many different index cards related to notes about the industry. And this collection covered roughly 50 to 75 boxes, plus a large amount of file cabinets. I'm sorry, I don't have any photographs of this, but I can tell you it was a very, very large collection. And it was kept for a very long time in our storage area since, I believe, the early 2000s. And like I said before, there was no donor form or documentation for this collection. The only thing that we actually had in our control file was a couple of letters to the donor's daughter. So the first was from our original head of archives, who had accessioned this collection, and then we had one other letter, basically reiterating we hadn't heard back, and we really need to get a deed of gift from you. And yeah, for the purposes of like privacy and such, no names will be mentioned. The forms that I will show you, all names and signatures have been redacted. So anyway, the reason we had to go about deaccessioning this collection. So the storage area that it was originally housed was going to be cleared out, and the collections that were there were going to be transferred to another area. And of course, the big problem with this particular collection, as I said, 50 to 75 boxes worth plus a ton of file cabinets. We had absolutely no room for this, and we couldn't just transfer it to the other area since it was a lot smaller. So our dean at the time basically told us we need to deaccession this collection and send it somewhere else. So this did pose as a challenge because we did reach out to several different institutions, and many of them, even though they found the collection very interesting, they, for various reasons, would not take it. By the time I became the head of special collections, I'd reached out to a couple more, and then reached out to Louisiana State University, LSU libraries, and they expressed interest in the collection and said that they could possibly accept it. Of course, once again, the problem was we didn't have the documentation that was needed, not just for explaining what can be done with that collection, but also whether it can be transferred or not. As I said before, the only contact information we had was through those two letters that were sent to the daughter, who allegedly was also the donor. And the only kind of contact information was her home address. We didn't have an email address, we didn't have a phone number, just the home address. So this required a lot of investigation online, both online and elsewhere. The archivists at LSU libraries also helped out with regards to investigating this information, and we got a lot of leads that that unfortunately went to dead ends. For example, one of the archivists actually found information regarding a business that the daughter may have owned. It was like an equestrian center. and there we actually had a name and a contact and like a phone number. I reached out to those, and unfortunately the business no longer existed, or the phone number was not listed. So as I said, it kept leading to dead ends, and eventually it got to the point where we couldn't find anything about this person. So since I had that address on those letters, I ended up having to actually drive out to that place. Thankfully, it wasn't too far from where I live. Unfortunately, it also turned out that the address was not exactly accurate. Now, I'm not necessarily sure about the circumstances, whether the donor moved or what, but when driving out, turned out, yeah, the address was not correct. The person did not live there. But thankfully, there actually was some luck on my side. The person who did live there actually happened to know the donor, and also knew that the donor had a power of attorney for her like finances and her health, and he very helpfully provided this person's contact information to me, and then reached out to this person, and right away we were able to make a connection, and the power of attorney met with the donor and got the go-ahead to make the deal with LSU. So with that, we met with LSU. So we met with the LSU contact, and for that we received the go-ahead to prepare for the transfer. Now this process alone actually required quite a bit of work. So the first issue was simply that the collection itself, like I said, was unprocessed and was kind of and the boxes that were in were just kind of messy and obviously not archival boxes or anything. And the file cabinets could not be transferred. So this required the LSU archivist to actually come over to our institution. They assessed and repacked many of the collapsing boxes, put them in archival approved boxes, and as well as the materials that were in those file cabinets. In addition, we also had to create completely new donor and transfer forms. I should mention here, at this point, we did not have a deaccession policy or form, and the form that we did have for was kind of messy and convoluted, and didn't really help with our purposes here. But I will talk a little bit more about that at the end. But what we had to do here first was we had to create, since we didn't have an original donor form, we needed to create one where the donor was giving us the collection and also giving us permission to transfer it. So here is, hopefully you can see this. This is what it looked. This is kind of what they look like. Obviously, our current donor form doesn't look anything like this, but at the time, we mocked up this very specific form where it does say that the donor is giving us the right, is donating these particular materials to our archives. However, as you see in the middle, and I'm specifically at the one on the left here, sorry. If you look here in the middle for disposition, it specifically says here, I grant to the UAAMC, which is University Archives and Acadia Manuscripts Collection, the right to transfer all materials in this collection to LSU libraries. With that, the donor, not the power of attorney, but yeah, the donor signed this area over here and provided provided the power of attorney's contact information. So with this particular donor form, we had the collection, and we were also given permission to transfer it. So then now you could see the form on the right was the specific gift agreement for LSU. So for here, this is just saying we're giving this collection to LSU, and we acted as the donor this time, since we were since we were transferring it. And here was and then this was this was on our end, our transfer agreement. So as I say, what we're saying here is we are transferring this collection to LSU, and both the LSU representative and EO representative, which was me, we signed off on that. So these were the forms that we had to take care of. With that, we ended up having to transfer the collection to LSU. And all in all, this whole process took quite a while. I mean, it took roughly from the middle of March to the beginning of June. So 2.5 months of this work. It was very difficult, but in the end, we were able to get the job done. We were able to transfer. The collection, not having to like give it back or throw it out or anyway. So now it has a proper home. So now just to talk a little bit about some lessons. As you could see, archives can often lead to detective work, especially when you don't have the supportive documentation that's needed. Here, as I outlined here, it required us to, actually it required me not just to like do investigation on this work, but actually at a certain point actually to go out and meet with the donor or the power of attorney to actually get some documentation right there. Because as we all know, if you don't have documentation saying like what you can do with your collections, it makes it very hard for you to actually do anything with it. So that documentation for us was very important. However, what this did lead to was, first off, the creation of a new deaccession form and process, which is, and here's an example. Here's an example of a blank one. It is 2 pages because the first page, I don't know if you can see it, but the first page just simply shows like what the materials are, what collection it came from, the accessioner identification number, and then the reasons for deaccession. This is something that Katie actually mentioned in the first presentation. Talking about the reasons, it could be maybe because the materials are outside of the mission, or they're deteriorated, or there's not enough room, or they're duplicates. And then, of course, at the bottom, we have a disposition section specifically stating what happened to the collection, where it's going, whatnot. The second page is for signatures. So basically, with all these deaccession forms, not only do I need to sign off on them, any of my staff, including myself, can sign up here as Dupree Library staff. But I have to sign off of it. My supervisor has to sign off, and then our dean needs to sign off in order for us to fully deaccession the material. In addition to this new deaccession form, this also cemented our practice of requesting completed donor forms in advance of accession. Many of our collections don't, especially our earlier ones, do not have donor forms. And sometimes when you bring in a collection and you want the donor to, or you say that the donor can complete the form later, that you really go into dangerous waters there, because a lot of times the donor may not complete the form, or they may not think about completing it. So for us, it's very important to I mean, it's not always possible, but it's always important for us to make sure that the donor form is completed before the collections are brought to us. And that is that case study of that particular collection. This is my contact information. If you have any other questions that you'd like to ask on how we went about this process, feel free to contact me. And thank you very much.
We have Dylan up next, but he has been having some connectivity issues. So Dylan, are you here? And if so, Melissa, can you make him a co-host again? I think he dropped out and came back in.
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Sorry. Please bear with me here. A storm has come in and it's amazing how quickly that affects our technology. All right, and you can see my screen. Yes, all right, thank you. My presentation is a shortened version of a chapter that I wrote as a case study and published in 2019. I should also note that it focuses on my time at the Center for Sacramento History in Northern California, where I served as the manuscripts archivist for 14 years before transitioning to New Mexico State University in early 2019. Beginning in 1978, the Center for Sacramento History began to acquire over 9 million feet of 16mm news film from the local NBC affiliate KCRA TV Channel 3. The collection documents the work of the station from 1957 to 1982, and while the early footage is limited, coverage of newsworthy events expanded considerably in the 1960s. Noted for their in-depth political coverage, KCRA TV was the first California station to have a Capitol News Bureau. The bulk of the collection contains day-to-day news stories, politics, crime, local events, sports, and human interest stories occurring in Northern California and specifically the Sacramento region. The acquisition came with the accompanying copyright, and the collection has subsequently been licensed for use in dozens of documentaries and appeared in news programming on all of the major television and cable news networks. In the fall of 2014, the center was contacted about the potential acquisition of over 7 million feet of 16mm news film, this time from KOVR TV, Channel 13. This collection documents the work of Sacramento's then ABC television affiliate from 1967 to 1981. KOVR TV, with bureaus in both Sacramento and Stockton, focused on events within the Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus counties region. KOVR TV is the oldest continuously operating television station in the region. The collection has a similar provenance as the KCRA TV film collection. Harry Sweet, self-described as Sacramento's first news cameraman, having worked at KCCC-TV before moving to KCRA TV for nearly 40 years, was instrumental in getting the Kelly Broadcast Company, owners of KCRA TV, to donate its news film material to the center as a gesture of community goodwill, as well as a lucrative tax write-off after an independent appraisal. Some 10 years later, Mr. Sweet discovered that KOVR TV was going to discard its television news film footage and paper indices and arranged to rescue the material. Mr. Sweet housed the collection at Sacramento State University, one of the California State University campuses, in 1991. The collection was eventually deeded to the school in 1993. Instead of going to the Special Collections and University Archives, the newly dubbed Harry Sweet Film Collection was housed at the Library Media Center, where it was thought its applicability in classroom instruction and faculty research would best be utilized. Throughout the mid-90s, the Library Media Center worked to raise funds via grants and private donations for preservation efforts and to make the film available and to market the film to outside users. With a change in library leadership, lack of fundraising success, and a basic difficulty of discovery and access to the footage, compounded by a lack of staffing and training, the collection never attained the heights once hoped for. At nearly 350 linear feet of records, the university began in 2014 to weigh its use versus the collection's physical footprint and maintenance costs. Sadly, I would later learn that the collection was never offered to the school's own special collections, literally just down the hall. Between September 2014 and March 2016, as the center's manuscripts archivist, I consulted with numerous people both inside and outside the organization to determine whether this collection should be acquired. Multiple meetings, several long phone calls, and dozens of pieces of correspondence were needed before a final decision could be made. When brought before the center's collections committee, which is made up of the entire staff, there were many questions to be answered. First, how would this acquisition meet the center's collection management policy? Would an acquisition of this nature advance the center's mission, quote, to educate and enrich the public by collecting, preserving, and making accessible the region's vast cultural heritage, end quote? Would it build on our current collections, strengthening our overall holdings? And the answer was unanimously yes. Other media collections held by the center, the previously mentioned KCRA TV, but also the Sacramento Bee, the regional paper of record, we deemed that having this all together was worthy. The second consideration was, did we have room in our climate-controlled storage to house over 350 linear feet of material? What preservation needs did the collection currently have at Sacramento State? With some shifting, we determined it would fit, and since the collection was already housed in archival enclosures, little needed to be done immediately for preservation. Third, could the center over time provide access to the news film to interested parties? What descriptive tools would come with the collection, and are they in a format that can be ingested and built upon? Is there a commitment to the costly migration to a digital format? Will the collection come with equipment to access the 16mm film? With the center's current audiovisual lab infrastructure and the paper and card files that would be transferred, access would be possible if rudimentary, and recent partnerships with the California Revealed project and the potential from licensing revenue for the news film meant the collection could be migrated as money became available. And finally, fourth, what original donor issues might complement this acquisition? Specifically, what did Sacramento State promise to the original donor? Did the university receive copyright with the film? And if so, could that right be transferred to the center? These questions ultimately are what greatly slowed down the process and took an additional year to negotiate. The university acted within their rights as copyright holder, having licensed the footage a handful of times over the years, yet when pressed on the subject, stated they were not completely sure that they actually did hold copyright. I knew that without the copyright, the center would not be able to acquire the collection. Too many past acquisitions with nebulous rights and unknown provenance had rightly left the staff unwilling to take on any such material. Additionally, our collection management policy specifically addressed the copyright issue, setting up strict standards with hardly any exceptions to the rules. I next asked Sacramento State to forward me copies of the donor files to investigate specifically the rights issue. From the large package of documents that arrived, I was able to determine that although it was clear from the deed of gift on the left and an accompanying June 1990 correspondence on the right from KOVR TV station manager that Mr. Sweet had physical possession and the right to donate to Sacramento State, I still remain unconvinced that the center would be in the clear when it came to copyright. In fact, in June 2015, I sent a letter and an email to Michael Fiorelli, who was the KOVR TV station manager at the time of the donation, and later the president and CEO of a broadcasting conglomerate in Columbus, Ohio, asking for a clarification on the issue. Specifically, quote, "One question I have concerns the film's copyright status. In a letter dated June 29, 1990, you clearly state that the film was the property of Mr. Sweet. Unfortunately, Mr. Sweet recently passed away, so I'm turning to you to see if you can recall if that transfer from KOVR TV to Mr. Sweet and Sacramento State included the film's copyright," end quote. About 2 weeks later, I received a reply referring me to the legal office of the KOVR TV station in Sacramento. Since the donation of the news film to Sacramento State in 1993, KOVR TV had changed broadcast affiliations from ABC to CBS in 1995, and its ownership groups had also changed 5 different times, from Anchor Media to River City Broadcasting in 1993, then Sinclair Broadcast Group in 1996, and finally to Viacom Television Stations Group in 2004, which itself split in 2005 to become CBS Television Studios. So I was now dealing directly with CBS, whose representative let me know immediately, quote, "Unless you can provide additional information to KOVR TV will retain its copyrights. In 1990, KOVR TV might have given Harry Sweet physical ownership of the archives, but there's nothing to indicate we gave him ownership in the underlying works. Again, this is absent any other documentation to the contrary," end quote. Over the next 3 weeks, the CBS market controller and I exchanged phone calls and emails wherein I asserted the center's willingness to acquire the collection and preserve it for the goodwill of the community whose history it captured, but only if we could be assured of the copyright as well. CBS countered that it was within their right to reclaim the news film collection, that it never gave Mr. Sweet copyright, and if it did, it would be non-transferable to anyone else. The center could have the collection for in-house educational use, but should licensing come up, all decisions and financial arrangements would be at KOVR TV's discretion. And the final cherry on the top of this discussion, in a bid for broadcast market supremacy, they said, quote, "CSH would further ensure that KOVR TV archives are treated at least as well as the KCRA TV film collection that CSH currently houses," end quote. I countered by asking, what documentation does CBS have showing its copyright ownership of the news film? when they did not create the content and the material was never in their hands. Despite my efforts, the question went unanswered and we reached an impasse. I decided to call in some legal advice and turned to the City of Sacramento's attorney's office. After the city historian and I met with one of the lawyers and presented all the documentation on the subject, we were pleasantly surprised to learn of their decision. In a written statement that was later placed in the donor file, they felt that there was a compelling argument that copyright had indeed been transferred to Mr. Sweet, saying it was clear in the correspondence that the intent was there, even if the magic words were not stated outright. Additionally, the material would have been destroyed had the film not been offered at home by Mr. Sweet, and the legal risk to the city was minimal. In February 2016, I informed the Dean of the Sacramento State Library that the center would love to take the possession of the collection, thereby ensuring its continued use within the Sacramento community. In March 2016, the deed of gift was signed, which included language for transfer of copyright. I never heard back from CBS. Sacramento State, to hasten the transfer, allowed the center to use our preferred mover and paid for the physical transfer of the materials. So to my great surprise, upon reviewing the collection in detail after its transfer, I found a large file containing documentation of Sacramento State's acquisition and plans for the collection in a letter dated September 21st, 1991 on KOVR TV letterhead from the news director to the head of the school's media center was the smoking gun I had been looking for. Quote, this letter grants CSU for educational purposes, unlimited and unrestricted use of the KOVR TV news film donated to California State University, Sacramento in 1991 by Harry Sweet, end quote. And further, since the film was deeded to CSUS for its own use, KOVR TV has no further proprietary claim to it or the images contained therein, end quote. With this document in hand, all worries were a thing of the past. Our diligence had paid off and we felt we could use the collection without any restrictions. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip ahead and just talk a little bit how we quickly were able to put up some material on the Online Archive of California, which is a regional database repository for institutions in California. And we quickly began getting hits on that. Particularly, here's a couple examples. In April of 2018, the center hosted a sold-out screening of an episode of the HLN docuseries Unmasking a Killer. Over 340 seconds of the footage from the KOVR TV collection appears in the 5 dramatic episodes that tell the story about the East Area Rapist or the Golden State Killer. At the time of the airing, this was a still at large predator who had burglarized over 120 homes, sexually assaulting over 50 women and killing 13 people, with many of these crimes taking place in the Sacramento region. Later in April 2018, CNN aired a series about Patty Hearst, who had been involved in a bank robbery in suburban Sacramento. From those 2 broadcasts, we had received nearly $25,000 in licensing revenue. In 2018, I was able to work with the production company of HBO on an adaptation of Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. The 6-part series that aired last summer takes an even deeper dive into the Golden State Killer case and how it impacted policing, criminal investigation, and forensics, and the communities in California that were terrorized by the actions of Joseph James DeAngelo. That DeAngelo was tracked down using archival and genealogical resources while still living in suburban Sacramento, made the whole experience a surreal one for the staff at the center. On a less morbid note, we also in early 2018 partnered with 2 local film producers to create a documentary about Alhambra Picture Palace Theater in Sacramento. We showed the 55-minute film to a sold-out audience at the Tower Theater, another Picture Palace theater that still operates in Sacramento, and we generated over $5,000 in revenue. So in conclusion, that the journey of the KOVR TV collection is one from a limited and potentially restricted access to one where now there's been a real renaissance in its use. Thank you.
Awesome presenters. Thank you so much. That was really a great panel. We can take questions now from participants. Go ahead and type in your chat if you've got anything to ask our panelists. One of the questions in the chat that was going on early on in the presentation was individual states have laws governing abandoned collection ownerships. Can any of you speak to the laws in your particular states about abandoned collection legislation and how that affects your deaccession or retaining of materials? No?
I will say that Kentucky has one, and the Special Collections has a big oral history component that's part of it's the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History. And I know that specifically for oral history interviews and projects, that director, Doug Boyd, has been able to use that law to go ahead and sort of take complete ownership of oral history interview projects that sort of were languishing for a period of time. But I think, and I'm not entirely at all sure about this, I think ours is a 25-year. It's 20 or 25 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
All right, any other comments, questions?
I was just going to jump in and note that there was some conversation in the chat about Texas not really having a law like that. And I don't know of one either, but that's kind of why we have that 90-day clause written into our deed, so that it's in effect like, okay, if we contact you and nothing happens, we are legally able to get rid of it. So we're not stuck with it forever.
All right, well, it looks like there aren't any more questions. Next up in the conference is meeting meeting with vendors. So go forth and meet with your vendors, and let's give a round of applause to our presenters. Thank you very much. All right. Have a good afternoon.